Chapter 2 Gathering Lizardmen 1. Zarayusu had been riding Rororo through the marsh for half a day. The sun had climbed high into the sky, but the enemy encounter he'd been fearing hadn't occurred, and he reached his destination safely. There were several dwellings built in the marsh in the same way Greenclaw's were, and the wooden posts sharpened to a point surrounded the area, facing outward. The posts had large gaps between them, but they would prevent a larger monster like Rororo from invading. This village had fewer houses than Greenclaw had, but the buildings themselves were larger. For that reason, it was hard to tell which tribe's population was higher. One of the buildings had a flag waving outside. On it was the Red Eye tribe's emblem. Yes, this was the first destination Zarayusu had chosen, the Red Eye village. After taking a quick scan around, he breathed a sigh of relief. It was extremely good luck they were still living in the same area of the marsh as they had a long time ago. Since it was possible that they'd moved due to the war, he'd thought he might have to start by searching around for them. Zarayusu turned to look back the way he came. He could see his own village. They must be in a great hurry to get ready. Now that he was away, he felt anxious, but he could safely assume there was practically no chance of their being attacked. That he'd made it here in one piece was proof of that. Was the Great One, or whoever, off his guard, or had he expected Zarayusu's actions? That wasn't clear. At least for now, the enemy didn't seem in the mood to break their promise or obstruct the Lizardman's war prep. Of course, even if this great enemy did move to stop them, Zarayusu's only option was to do what he believed in. He dismounted Rororo and stretched his back. His muscles were stiff from riding for so long, but stretching made them feel better, even good. Then he told Rororo to wait for him. And gave him some dried fish from his bag for combined breakfast and lunch. He would rather have instructed him to procure his own food somewhere in the area, but considering that might involve infringing on Red Eye Tribe's hunting grounds, he decided against it. After petting each of Rororo's snakeheads a couple of times, Zarayusu left him and set off walking. With Rororo nearby, people might be wary of the Hydra and not come out to meet him. Zarayusu was a messenger, bringing an offer of alliance. He didn't want to seem coercive or threatening. His feet made a splish-splash noise in the water as he walked. At the edge of his field of vision, he spotted several members of the Red Eye warrior caste walking parallel with him on the opposite side of the post enclosure. Their gear was no different from that of Greenclaw's warriors. They wore no armor and carried spears made from sharpened bones attached to sticks. Some had sling-like straps, so the fact that they didn't have any rocks at the ready told him they had no immediate intent to attack. He took care not to provoke them as he walked around to the main gate. Then he faced the Lizardmen, watching him from the other side, and raised his voice. "I'm Zarayusu Shasha of the Greenclaw tribe. I want to have a word with this tribe's chief." Eventually, it wasn't a terribly short amount of time, but it certainly wasn't long, an elderly lizardman with a gnarled staff and white symbols on his body appeared. 5 robust lizardmen followed behind. A priest? Zarayusu stood proudly. Right now they were equal. He couldn't bow his head. Even when the priest's eyes moved the brand on his chest, he maintained the same posture. "I'm Zarayusu Shasha from the Greenclaw tribe. I have something to discuss with your chief." "I won't say. It was good of you to come. But it seems the one who leads our tribe will see you. Follow me." The strange turn of phrase confused Zarayusu for a moment. Why not chief? And they didn't even ask for proof that he was who he said he was. He didn't want to begin the conversation too clumsily and upset them. Despite feeling that something was off, he silently followed. The hut they led him to was a fine dwelling. In terms of his own tribe, it was even bigger than his brother's house. Patterns in rare dyes decorated the walls, which spoke to the high status of the one who lived there. One thing that caught his attention was the lack of windows. The only openings were small holes here and there for air. Like all lizardmen, Zardiusu could see fine in the dark, but that didn't mean he preferred living in it. So why is their leader staying in such a dark room? Zaryusu wondered, but there didn't seem to be anyone who could answer for him. He turned around. The priest and warriors who had guided him there were already gone. Initially, he thought leaving him alone was incredibly imprudent, to the point where he even indirectly asked them about it. But when they said they were leaving because the acting chief wished it, his opinion of the person waiting in the room jumped. Despite what he'd said to his brother, Zardiusu didn't expect to make it back unscathed, but for the Renai tribe to surround him with armed warriors and pressure him would have been useless. Probably the first thing he would have felt was disappointment at their caliber as warriors. But if they'd read him so well and were acting generous, they might be good negotiators, difficult to deal with. Ignoring the sensation of distant eyes on him, he approached the door and raised his voice. I am Zardiusu Shasha of the Green Claw tribe. I've been told the leader of this tribe is here. Allow me to come in. He heard a quiet sound, a hoarse female voice giving him permission to enter. Zardiusu pushed open the door with no hesitation. Inside it was dark, as he expected. The contact with the light outside made him blink even though he could see in the dark. The smell that wafted out was something like an herbal bath, a pungent mix of greens. He figured the one inside would be an elderly female, but what he found completely overturned his expectations. Good of you to come, a voice said to him from the darkness. From the other side of the door she'd sounded old, but now he could hear youthful energy. Once his eyes adjusted, she came into view. She's white. That was his first impression. Her scales were white like snow, without a single impurity. Her deep crimson eyes sparkled like rubies. Her slender body was not masculine but feminine. White and red symbols covered her. They meant she was an adult, that she was proficient in many types of spells, and that she was single. What does it feel like to be stabbed with a spear? Zardiusu knew. First, a hot, burning sensation shot through the body, and with every heartbeat came a sharp, all-encompassing pain. And that's how Zardiusu was feeling right now. It didn't hurt. It just... He simply stood there, not saying anything. How did she interpret his silence? A cynical smile appeared on her face. So, I look strange, even to the bearer of Frostbane, one of the 4 great treasures, Albinos are extremely rare in nature, in part because they stick out, which makes surviving difficult. In Lizardman society, the situation was similar. They weren't quite civilized enough to guarantee the survival of members who had poor eyesight and were weak against sunlight. It was rare that albinos lived into adulthood, and in some cases they were even culled at birth. If the other lizardmen viewed albinos as just a nuisance, that would be tolerable, but in some cases they were even seen as monsters. That was the root of her cynicism. But prejudice wasn't Zardiusu's issue. "What's the matter?" she asked, perplexed that he was still standing in front of the door, doing nothing. Then, without replying to her question, he emitted a call with vibrato that ended on a high tone. Hearing that, the female's eyes popped open and her jaw dropped slightly. She was part shocked, part confused, and part scandalized. It was a mating call. Zardiusu came back to himself, and realizing what he'd just done, what call he'd just unconsciously performed, he reacted in a way similar to a human blushing. His tail flailed around, so violently it seemed like he might damage the hut. No, I didn't mean that. I mean, no, Perhaps Zardiusu's surprise and panic had the contrary effect of smoothing her feathers. Her teeth clacked as she smiled and said awkwardly, "Please, calm down. It'll just cause trouble for me if you get all rowdy." Oh, sorry. He bobbed his head in apology and entered the house. By this point, the female lizardman's tail was drooping down and suggesting she had regained her composure, but the twitching tip showed that she hadn't calmed down completely. Have a seat. She indicated a cushion, which was woven out of some kind of plant, placed on the floor. Thanks. Zaryusu sat down, and she mirrored him. Pleased to meet you. I'm a traveler from the Green Claw tribe, Zaryusu Shasha. Thank you for the polite introduction. I'm the acting chief of the Red Eye tribe, Crusch Lulu. Having finished with the formalities, they visually appraised each other. Silence reigned in the hut for a little while, but it couldn't stay like that forever. Zaryusu was a guest. The one to speak first had to be Crusch, the host. First of all, messenger, I don't think there is any need for us to stand on ceremony. I'd like to speak with our mouths wide open, so feel free to relax. This meant she wanted to speak honestly, and Zaryusu nodded. Thanks for that. I'm not used to speaking formally. So, can I ask you why you came here? Crusch asked, although she had a pretty good idea. An undead suddenly appearing in the middle of the village, someone using the Tier 4 spell Control Cloud, this visiting male from another tribe, one who some called a hero. There was only one thing it could be. Crusch imagined how he would answer, and he demolished her expectations. Marry me. What? For a moment she couldn't believe her ears. Of course. That's not the reason I came here. I fully understand I should get the real reason out of the way before moving on to this, but I can't lie to myself. Feel free to laugh and call me a foolish man. Ah, ha. These words she'd never heard before, words she thought would never have anything to do with her, sent a storm of confusion ripping through her train of thought and tearing it irreparably apart. Zaryusu smiled awkwardly at her and continued speaking. Sorry. Really, my apologies. And during an emergency, you can let me know your answer later. Okay. Somehow managing to put her mind back together, or perhaps reboot it, Crusch regained her composure. But she instantly remembered what he'd just said, and her temperature felt ready to skyrocket. She looked over the male before her, making sure he didn't notice. His countenance was extremely calm. How can he be so relaxed after saying something like that to me? Is he out there courting all the time? Or does he get propositioned a lot? I mean, it did sound cool. What am I thinking? This was his plan for sure. He wants to get me in the palm of his hand. Well, why would he want to mate with me anyway? Crusch was so thrown off at being seen as a female for the first time that she didn't have the wherewithal to notice the tip of Zaryusu's tail spasming too. The male before her was mobilizing every ounce of his mental energy to suppress the frank expression of all the things in his heart. That was what created this lull. They both needed some quiet time under the veil of silence to cool down their dizzy heads. Finally, after enough time had elapsed, Crusch thought they should return to their previous topic for starters. She was about to ask him again why he'd come to their village when she remembered what he said last time. How can I ask now? Her tail kerwapped the floor once, and the male in front of her jerked as if she'd hit him. Crusch inwardly fretted that her behavior was too rude. Even if he was a traveler, he had still come as the representative of his tribe, and he wasn't just any lizardman. He was the hero who possessed Frostpain. He was too important to take this attitude with. But it's your fault! More importantly, say something! Unbeknownst to Crusch, who was busy controlling the volcano erupting inside her, Zaryusu had chosen silence out of shame for his indiscreet behavior. The wordless void continued, and Crusch resigned herself to the fact that if this kept up, there would be nothing she could do. But then finally she thought to change the subject. Should I have expected that you wouldn't be afraid of me? Her question, tinged with cynicism, was met with a silent query from Zaryusu. What are you talking about? Crusch thought in turn. What is this guy thinking? I was asking if you're afraid of this white body of mine.
It's like the snow that caps the mountains.
Huh?
It's a pretty color.
Of course, she had never once in her life heard those words before. What is this guy saying? Unable to withstand her internal pressure, the lid keeping her emotions in check was blown off with enough force to send it flying. Zaryusu reached out casually and ran a hand over her scales. They were lustrous and pretty, as if they'd just been polished, and a little cold. His hand glided over them. Shah! Crusch emitted an exhalation that sounded like a short threat. That restored at least a smidgen of their respective calms. They both understood what had happened, what he had done without thinking, and they were both shaken. What instinct had made him do that? Why did that happen to her? They became impatient with the questions, and the impatience bred confusion. The result was their two tails batting against the hut, whap, whap, so hard that it shook. After a couple of moments, they looked at each other's faces, noticed what they were doing, and both tails froze, as if time itself had stopped. Was heavy the word for this atmosphere? Or tense? Silence fell over them, and they glanced at each other. Crusch had finally gotten her feelings sorted, and with a cold look in her eye that said she wasn't going to tolerate any lies, she asked, "This is all very sudden. What's with you?" She hadn't been able to express herself very well in words, but Zaryusu seemed to understand, and replied honestly with no hesitation.
Love at first sight. And I might die in this fight, so I don't want to have any regrets.
Hearing his simple honesty, his words that seemed to hide nothing, Crusch found herself at a loss for a moment, but part of them she just couldn't buy. The bearer of Frostpain has resigned to die?
We don't know how many we're up against. We can't be careless. Did you see the monster who brought the message? The one who came to my village was...
Zaryusu described it, and Crusch nodded.
Yes, it's the same one. Do you know what it is?
No, no one in my tribe knows.
Oh, I met one once.
He stopped there to see her reaction.
I ran away.
Huh?
I couldn't have won. Well, at best, I would have been half dead by the end.
Crusch understood what a terrifying undead it was, and was relieved that holding back the warriors had been the right decision.
It can scream in a way that messes with your head. Also, it's incorporeal, so it's basically immune to attacks that aren't made with enchanted weapons. Even with numbers, you can't win.
With druid magic, we can enchant weapons for a limited time.
Can you block attacks on the mind?
We can boost resistance, but we don't have quite enough power to protect everyone.
I see. Can any priest do that?
Almost all of them can boost resistance. I'm the only one in this tribe who can protect someone from confusion, though. Crusch noted Zaryusu's breathing grow a little rough. It seemed like he'd realized that her position wasn't just for show. Yes, Crusch Lulu was quite an accomplished druid, and probably possessed more power than any Lizardman head priest.
What number was the Red-Eye tribe on the attack list?
It told us 4th.
And what are you going to do about it?
Time passed. Crusch wondered what the point of talking about it was. Greenclaw had surely chosen to fight. Zaryusu had probably come to form an alliance, was going to say, "Fight with us." Where was the benefit in that for Red-Eye? They weren't interested in forming an alliance. They were for evacuation. It was the height of stupidity to go up against an opponent who could use Tier 4 magic. And if the messenger was really so horrible, what other conclusion could there be? But could she bluntly say all that? As she swirled in the whirlpool of her thoughts, Zaryusu smiled and said, as if he were talking to himself,
"I'll go ahead and say what I really think."
"What's he going to say?" Crusch fixed her eyes on him.
"What I'm worried about is what happens after the evacuation."
Crusch didn't seem to grasp his meaning, so he spoke matter-of-factly.
"Even if we're able to move from this place we're so used to, do you really think we'll manage to have the same lifestyle somewhere else?"
"No. I mean, it would be difficult." Leaving this place and creating a new habitat would require a fight for survival. They would have to win in that ecosystem's struggle for existence. The Lizardmen weren't champions of the lake or anything, and acquiring the marsh had taken years and years. There was no way their race could build a habitat in an unfamiliar place just like that.
"There's also a real possibility that we won't be able to gather enough food."
Not understanding what he was getting at, she responded in a prickly, confused voice. "Yeah?"
"So, what would happen if all 5 tribes in this area tried to evacuate?"
Then she didn't know what to say, because she had finally figured out what Zaryusu meant. Even though the lake was vast, an evacuation spot that one tribe chose was bound to look good to the others as well. What would they do if a fishing rivalry broke out when they were already fighting a new struggle for existence? That could get ugly. It could end up like the war. "But you can't mean fighting when we're not sure we can win isn't any—"
"No, I'm not. I'm counting on reducing the number of mouths across all tribes."
"That's your reason?" That was why he wanted to form an army and fight, even if they lost, just to decrease the population of lizardmen. The idea that those besides the warriors, hunters, and priests fighting for their survival could die was extreme, but she could understand it. No, having them die might be the correct choice in the long run. If there were fewer mouths to feed, they could get away with less food. Then they might have a chance at cohabitating. Crusch desperately searched for a way to refute the argument. "You're saying that even though we don't know how dangerous the new spot might be, we should go in with smaller numbers?"
"Listen to me. Even if we take over the area, no problem. Then what? If the fish supply runs low, the 5 tribes will just have to kill one another."
"But we might be able to catch lots of fish."
"And if we can't?"
His cold retort left her lost for words. Zaryusu was basing his actions on the next-to-worst-case scenario. Crusch was making mostly hopeful observations. If they operated based on her ideas and something bad happened, it would be a disaster. But it wouldn't be if they went with Zaryusu's plan. And if the number of adult lizardmen decreased as a result of their defeat, at least they would have died honorable deaths.
"If you refuse, we'll have to fight you first."
His dark voice gave Crusch chills. He'd announced he wasn't going to let Red Eye be the only tribe to maintain its population and move to a new location. That was a valid decision, and she understood it completely. It was the only way to avoid the danger of weakened tribes being destroyed by Red Eye and the numbers they had preserved. It was only natural that one entrusted with their tribe's survival would think in that way. She would probably do the same thing if she were in his position.
"I think the chances of killing one another in the new land will be lower if we form an alliance, even if we lose."
Crusch didn't understand him, and let a genuine expression of puzzlement appear on her face. Zaryusu explained in another way.
"We'll have deeper friendship ties. Instead of different tribes, we'll feel like comrades who fought together."
"I see." She rolled the words around in her mouth. So, if the tribes spilled blood together, things would be less likely to devolve into a fatal fight, even if the food situation was bad. But she wondered, based on her experience, if that was really true. As Crusch delved into her own thoughts, facing slightly downward in silence, Zaryusu asked in a voice that troubled her, "By the way, how did your tribe make it through that time?" It was like she'd been stabbed with a needle. Her head jerked up in spite of herself. When she looked at him, she saw he was surprised. "Oh, so he really doesn't know." They hadn't been together long, but Crusch had already gotten the hang of Zaryusu's personality. She instinctively understood that he wasn't asking as a threat. She narrowed her eyes and looked at him intently, like she was trying to bore a hole into his head. She knew the baffled Zaryusu had no idea why he was getting such a stare, but she couldn't stop. "Do I have to answer?" Crusch's voice was full of loathing. The change was so dramatic it nearly felt like he was talking to a different person. But Zaryusu couldn't back down. Maybe her answer would save them all.
"I want to know, was it the power of your priests, or some other way? Maybe it can save it."
Having said that much, he faltered. If there was a way to save them, Crusch wouldn't look so pained. Perhaps she was able to read what Zaryusu was thinking just then. She snorted and scoffed at the whole thing, herself included. "That's right. There's no way to save anyone at all." She paused and smiled an exhausted smile. "We were cannibals. We ate our own dead." Zaryusu was shocked, speechless. Killing the weak, decreasing the number of mouths to feed, was not taboo, but cannibalism was unclean, the most taboo of taboos. Why did she tell me that? Why would she tell a secret she should have carried to her grave to a stranger from another tribe, a visitor? Does she not mean to let me go alive? No, that can't be right. I don't get that feeling from her. Crusch wasn't sure why she'd said it either. She knew plenty well how much lizardmen from other tribes would scorn them. So why? Her mouth chattered away as if she no longer had control over it. "Back then, when the other tribes started the war, we didn't have enough food either, and things were bad. The reason we didn't fight in the war was that our tribe has a lot of priests and not many warriors. Thanks to our priests, we could make lots of food with magic," she went on unceasingly as if possessed. "But the amount of food they could make was still insignificant compared to the number of tribe members. All we could do was face death and slowly tread the path to our own extinction. But one day, the chief brought food, bright red meat. Maybe I wanted someone to listen, to hear the story of my crime." She ground her teeth together. The male before her was quietly listening. If he felt disgust, it didn't show on his face. Crusch was thankful for that. "What kind of meat was it? Everyone pretty much knew. At the time, we had strict laws, and any family who broke them was kicked out of the village. Our chief brought meat just after some people had been banished. We just shut our eyes and ate it, to survive. But we couldn't go on like that. At one point, all the built-up discontent exploded into a revolt." She closed her eyes and remembered their chief. "We ate it. We knew, and we ate it. So we were just as guilty. Honestly, when I think of it now, it's so strange." After a moment of silence, she looked squarely at Zaryusu. It surprised her to find a sensation of happiness inside, seeing no disgust in his quiet eyes. "Why would I feel that way?" She had a vague idea of the answer. "Please look at me. Every now and then in Red Eye, someone like me is born. They always have something they excel at. For me, it was priestly powers. For that reason, our authority is second only to the chief. Then I went and led the revolution and revolted against him. The village split in two and fought, but my side won because we had more people."
"And then, because your population decreased, the food was enough to go around?"
"Yes. In the end, we survived. When we revolted, the chief wouldn't surrender.
He died having sustained countless wounds, and when I dealt the fatal blow, he smiled at me."
Crusch strung her words together painfully. They were like pus that had gradually gathered in her heart since the day she killed their chief. To Zaryusu, she was finally able to spit out these things she'd never be able to say to the tribe, the ones who'd believed in her and fought against the chief. That was why she couldn't stop. Her words were like water flowing from high to low ground.
"It wasn't the kind of smile you'd flash at someone who was killing you. There was no hatred, or envy, or hostility, or cursing, or anything. It was a truly lovely smile. Maybe the chief was right all along. I keep thinking that. With the death of our chief, the one who was the root of all our evil, the tribe came together again. And not only that, we even reduced our own number, enough to solve the food issue."
That was all she could take. The dam broke with all the strength she had expended struggling to bear the burden of her crime as acting chief. She gulped back the muddy surge. With her thoughts in tatters, she couldn't get them into words. Weeping, coo, coo. There weren't many tears due to her biological structure, but the emotions were the same. She broke down. Her body was so small. When living in nature, weakness was as good as a crime. Of course, children were protected, but strength was a priority for adult male and female lizardmen equally. From that standpoint, she must have been humiliated. It couldn't be good for the leader of the tribe to show weakness to a member of another tribe, someone she wasn't even close to. But the sentiments in Zaryusu's heart weren't anything like that. Maybe it was partly because she was a beautiful female, but more than that, she was a warrior, a wounded warrior, who gasped, struggled, and still went forward. She'd shown only a glimpse of weakness. If she was standing up and trying to go forward, she was no weakling. Zaryusu approached and gently put his arms around her.
"We aren't all-powerful or all-knowing. All we can do is decide how to act as we go. I might have done the same thing in your position. I'm not trying to cheer you up. Are there any correct answers in this world? We just keep going forward, full of pain and regret, with scars on the bottoms of our feet. All you can do is go forward. That's what I think."
They could feel each other's body heat and hear the beating of their hearts faintly. The two pulses gradually matched rhythms and created the illusion they were one. It was a strange feeling. Zaryusu felt a warmth he had never experienced in all his life as a lizardman. It wasn't because he was holding another lizardman.
"Is it because I'm holding this female, Crusch Lulu?"
A little time went by, and then Crusch lifted herself off Zaryusu's chest. As her body heat withdrew, Zaryusu felt it was unfortunate. Of course, he was too embarrassed to say so.
"I've made an unsightly impression. Do you hate me?" "What's unsightly? You struggle down your path, get hurt along the way, but continue on. Do I look like such a fool that I'd think that unsightly? You're beautiful."
Her white tail writhed, striking the floor several times.
"Yikes."
Incapable of asking what she meant by that lone word, Zaryusu asked a different question.
"More importantly, does Red Eye farm fish?"
"Farm?"
"Yeah, raise fish for yourselves to eat."
We don't do anything like that. Fish are a blessing from nature.
As far as Zaryusu knew, no Lizardman tribe had fish farming technology. The very idea of increasing the amount of food they had with their own hands was foreign to them.
That seems to be the way priests, druids, think. But could you change your mind, so that you could grow fish to eat? The priests in my tribe accepted it.
Crusch bobbed her head, yes.
Then I'll teach you how to farm. It's important to give them the right food. You can use fruit that druids make with magic. They'll grow quite well when you give them those.
You really don't mind sharing your technology with us?
Of course not. Hiding it won't help anyone, and it's more important to save the tribes.
Crusch bowed low with her tail pointed up and thanked him.
I'm grateful.
You don't really have to thank me. In exchange, I need to ask you again.
The emotion drained out of Crusch's face. That deeply calmed Zaryusu. It was a question he couldn't avoid. He held his breath, and at the same time Crusch inhaled. Then he asked,
"What is Red Eye's plan for the imminent war?"
We decided yesterday to evacuate.
Then I'll ask the acting chief, Crusch Lulu. Do you still think you'll do that?
She couldn't answer. Her reply would decide the fate of her tribe. It was only natural to hesitate. But Zaryusu could do nothing besides put on a troubled smile.
It's your decision. The reason your chief smiled at you in the end must have been because he was entrusting the tribe's future to you. Now's the time to carry on that mission. I've said everything I can say. All that's left is for you to decide.
Crusch's eyes rolled, casting her gaze around the room. She wasn't trying to escape or looking for help. She was just trying to arrive at the correct answer within herself. No matter what her conclusion, Zaryusu would accept it.
As the acting chief, let me ask you, how many are you going to allow to evacuate?
We're planning to have each tribe evacuate 10 warriors, 20 hunters, 3 priests, 70 males, 100 females, and a few children.
And the others?
Depending on the circumstances, we may just have them die.
Crusch said nothing and merely looked up into empty space. Then she murmured,
I see.
So I want to know your decision, Acting Chief Crusch Lulu.
Crusch considered all kinds of plans. Killing Zaryusu was one option, of course. Personally, she didn't want to do that, but as acting chief, she felt differently.
I could kill him, and then the whole village could escape.
She rejected that idea. It was a very dangerous gamble. In the first place, they didn't even have any proof that he had come alone.
So how about promising him to fight, and then running away?
This could also be problematic. They ran the risk of his changing plans and opponents to cull the population by fighting with the Red Eye. His real goal was decreasing the number of mouths to feed. In that case, it didn't matter who they fought. In the end, if she said she wouldn't form an alliance, he'd probably take that answer home and come back with an army to destroy the Red Eye. However, maybe Zaryusu hadn't noticed, but there was one hole in his plan. Even so, if they didn't go with him, they wouldn't be able to avoid the food problem. Crusch smiled knowingly. There had been no way out of this conversation from the beginning. From the point she'd heard what he'd had to say, from the time the Green Claw tribe started their plan to form an alliance. There was only one way for the Red Eye to survive. Join the alliance and fight with them. Zaryusu surely knew that, too. So the reason he was waiting for her answer must have been because he wanted to make sure the commanding Lizardman was worth allying with, and that they would commit. But if those words came out of her mouth, many lives would be lost. And,
let me say one thing. We're not fighting to die. We're fighting to win. I may have said some things that made you anxious, but if we beat the enemy, we'll be laughing about it later. So please don't misunderstand that point.
Crusch nodded that she understood.
He really is a nice male,
she thought as she gave her decision.
We of the Red Eye tribe will cooperate with you, so our chief's smile won't be meaningless, and so as many Red Eye members as possible can survive.
She bowed deeply and stretched her tail straight up.
I thank you.
He slowly bowed and lifted his tail. His actions said more than words could express. Early in the morning, Zaryusu stood in front of Rororo and gazed at the gate of the Red Eye village. He yawned a huge "Coo-ha" in spite of himself. He had participated as an observer in the Red Eyes meeting until late the previous night, so he was a bit tired, but there wasn't much time left. He had to get to another tribe today. Fighting back sleep unsuccessfully, he yawned again, even bigger than before. He had the feeling that he would be able to sleep on Rororo even if his balance wasn't that great. He gazed at the rising sun. It seemed almost yellow, and then looked back at the gate and started. Something strange was coming out of it. It was a clump of grass. Weeds were growing here and there out of a tunic sewn with many loose strips of fabric and strings. If one laid it sideways in the marsh, from a distance it would have looked like a patch of grass.
Ah, I've seen a monster like this somewhere before.
Zardiusu remembered something he'd seen on his travels. Behind him, Rororo let out a low warning call. Of course, he knew who it was. There was no mistaking her, with her white tail peeking out a bit. He watched the tail sway cheerfully and calmed Rororo down as the clump of grass came over to him.
"Morning!"
Yeah, good morning. It seems like you had no trouble getting the tribe on board.
He looked at the red-eye dwellings. The village was in a frenzy first thing in the morning, and lizardmen ran busily to and fro. Crusch stood next to him, facing in the same direction, and answered,
"Yes, no trouble. We should be ready to leave for the Razortail tribe today, and the evacuees should be ready soon too."
According to information the priests received via magic, Razortail had been sentenced to annihilation first. Timing-wise, it was fortunate that it hadn't been Dragon Tusk.
So why did you come out here, Crusch?
"It's simple, Zardiusu. But before that, tell me what you're planning to do now."
After the meeting that lasted from evening into the early morning, it seemed natural to call each other by name. They'd gotten closer, and so they could speak more at ease.
I'm going to go to another tribe, Dragon Tusk.
Strength is everything to them, right? Supposedly, they have the most powerful military of all the tribes.
Yeah, that's right. We've never had dealings with them before, so I have to go prepared.
Everything he'd ever heard about them was wrapped in mystery, so going at all was extremely dangerous. And the fact that they had taken in the survivors from the two tribes who lost the war made it even more dangerous. From the perspective of those survivors, Zardiusu, who had fought in the war, was without doubt a hateful enemy. Still, for the upcoming fight, Dragon Tusk was the tribe whose cooperation he needed the most.
"I see. Then I should definitely go with you."
What?
"Is that weird?"
The clump of grass rustled. He couldn't see her face, so he wasn't sure what she meant.
I dunno if it's weird, but it's dangerous.
"Is there anywhere that isn't dangerous right now?"
Zardiusu hesitated. If he mulled it over with a clear head, there were lots of pros to taking her along. But as a male, he didn't like the idea of taking his crush into certain peril.
I'm not thinking clearly.
The grass hid her from view, but it seemed like she laughed a little bit.
I have a different question. What's with the get-up?
"It doesn't look good on me?"
Looking good or not isn't the issue. It's bizarre. But would it be better to praise her?
Zardiusu wasn't sure how to respond. After careful consideration, he decided to get on her good side, even though he couldn't see her expression.
I guess it looks good?
Yeah, right, she snapped. There was probably nothing Zardiusu could have done to not feel disheartened in that moment.
"I just can't take the sunlight, so I usually wear this when I go out."
I see.
"Oh, but I didn't get your answer. Will you let me go with you?"
It was pointless to say what he thought, and having her along would probably work to his advantage in forming the alliance. Maybe she had proposed it because she thought so too. In that case, he didn't have any more objections.
Okay. Lend me your strength, Crusch.
She looked thrilled from the bottom of her heart.
"Got it, Zardiusu. You can count on me."
Are you ready to go?
"Of course. I packed my bag and everything."
Now that she mentioned it, there was a lump on her back under the grass. It smelled like fresh herbs, a little pungent. As a druid, she probably had techniques that used medicinal herbs, so she must have brought some.
Zaryusu, you look sleepy.
Oh, I am. Just a little bit. Between this and that, I haven't really slept much in the past couple of days.
A white hand suddenly extended from under her grass clothes.
Here, it's a Riku nut. Try chewing it with the shell on.
Zaryusu took the brown nut out of her hand and unhesitatingly popped it into his mouth. A bitterness radiated out of it and took the edge off his tiredness, but he couldn't really say he felt awake. As he kept chewing, however, the flavor suddenly exploded across his tongue. It made his breath smell, too.
Oh, how refreshing! It really gets into your sinuses.
He inadvertently reacted in his brother's trademark way.
Shoo, shoo.
Crusch laughed at him.
You're not sleepy anymore, right? But that doesn't mean you're not tired, so don't overdo it. You should take a break when you can.
Satisfied by the fresh, cool feeling in his mouth and nose, Zaryusu nodded.
Then I'll take a nap on Rororo at some point.
Without further ado, he climbed up Rororo's back. Crusch followed a moment later. Rororo glared at Zaryusu, none too happy with the strange sensation of grass creeping along his body, but Zaryusu managed to soothe him.
Okay, let's go. It's not very stable, so hold on to me.
Got it.
She wrapped her arms around him, and the prickly grass tickled. This feeling wasn't quite what he'd expected, and he frowned.
What's the matter?
It's nothing. Let's go. Okay, Rororo, we're counting on you.
What am I so happy about?
Hearing Crusch's excited voice behind him, Zaryusu smiled in spite of himself as they swayed along.